talked about this. It says, what proceeds out of a man's mouth comes from where? It comes from the heart of a man. Your tongue controls your whole life, and what controls your tongue? This. And perhaps that's the scariest part about it, is that when we're not careful with our tongue, it doesn't just say things about, it's not just like, well, it's not like when you hit your thumb with a hammer. You know, you ever done that? You're hammering away and you don't control your arm right. Or you don't control this hand right that's holding the piece, and you hit your thumb with the hammer. Well, that just says that you didn't have a whole lot of control and good aim. But when you don't aim right with your tongue, when you say things that are wrong using your tongue, it doesn't just say something about your body, it says something about your heart. When I hit my thumb with a hammer, it doesn't say anything about my heart, does it? It just said, well, Scott's a bad aim. But when I say something mean, or callous, or thoughtless, or you fill in the blank, that says something about me. It says something about the pilot controlling the rudder. And so here he says, just like a ship, you've got that rudder controlling the ship and the pilot controlling the rudder, and that rudder controls the whole thing wherever the pilot wants it to go. So exercising and controlling the tongue is about being a good pilot. It's about having a good heart. It's about molding our character. And so the way you speak, it says more than anything else, really, I guess you could say about you. The way you speak talks about your character. It explains who you actually are. And so if you're not careful with your speech, you're not careful with who you are. And so if you use words carelessly, well, you are also the kind of person who's careless with your character. That's what that comes down to. And so then he goes down to verse 5. He says, even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. So here it is. It's a small part of your body, but it boasts great things. And it's kind of funny, the words he uses, boasts, because what's one of the things your tongue can get you in trouble with? Boasting. And building yourself up greater than you ought to be. And in fact, in James chapter 3, verse 1, what was one of the problems they had? People being too quick to say, I want to be a teacher. Everybody listen to me. And so the tongue, it boasts great things. And then he compares it to a forest, and particularly a fire in a forest. It says, see how great a forest a little fire kindles. Now, as we've watched the rest of the nation have these heat waves, places like Colorado, where there's been droughts and heat, and we've been over here in the rain, and we're just finally enjoying some nice weather here, the sun. But what's the rest of the country been suffering through? This heat. And they worry because if it gets hot enough, all it takes is one little spark, and how much forest can be burned down. When they have forest fires, they don't count them in 1 acre forest fires, do they? They say, oh yeah, we lost 250 acres. I mean, that's a lot of land. Lot of wood that gets burned. I mean, you think about it, Oliver, you're on what, 5 acres out on your place? 12. Oh, okay. Sorry, 12 acres out on Oliver's place. 12 acres, Mr. Moneybags over here. 12 acres. He winced when I said 5 because he knew he was going to have to fix it. 12 acres. If there were 12 acres of fire, that they had forest and 12 acres burned down, enough to cover all of Oliver's property, guess what? It wouldn't even make the news. They said, in fact, if it did make the news, what would they say? We caught it early. We stopped it before it got out of hand. 12 acres. Forest fires all start with just little things. That's why they have Smokey the Bear, right? Only you can control forest fires. And so James says, when you say something, it's like a fire. And here's the thing, a fire is a lot like a bullet, isn't it? What's one of the first things they teach you in firearm safety? Once you pull the trigger and that bullet leaves the barrel, you don't have any control over it, do you? Once it leaves the barrel, it's just going to go. And so you just pull the trigger just like that. No big deal. But then once it's out, you can't get it back. You ever think about the fact that words are exactly the same way? Once you say a word, once you let that spark off your tongue, do you have any control over how many trees get burned down? See, once it's out of control, it's out of control. It's totally left your power. And you say, I didn't intend for it to. When I said that, I didn't have that intention at all. I meant this or that. Does it matter? When you have a teacher and they've got students and you have a teacher and they say one callous word to a student and that kid remembers it the whole rest of their life and has problems and views themselves negatively the rest of their life because of that one comment that teacher makes, do you think that teacher, when they said something mean to Johnny, little Johnny, that they meant it to ruin Johnny's life? No, of course not. Probably they just didn't have their coffee that morning. They didn't mean it that way at all, did they? But it did. When you gossip about somebody, most gossip, especially within the church, is typically good people who just want something to talk about. And they don't mean to hurt anybody, and they have the best of intentions, and yet, what happens? Church gossip. You say something about somebody, it goes around to this person, goes around this person, goes around this person, totally ruins somebody's reputation. You say, I didn't mean that. I didn't intend that at all. I know, but it still happened. See, your tongue, it boasts great things, doesn't it? So all he's laying down is one example after another, one illustration after another of what kind of trouble your tongue can cause. I have a picture here of the Great Chicago Fire. The Great Chicago Fire, they traced it back, and they tried to say it burned whole city, just whole city laid waste. Tens of thousands of people who were affected, people who died, people who were homeless. Horrible, horrible thing. You know what they say most likely caused it? They traced it back as far as they could. You know what I think it was? A cow. A cow. Cow that accidentally knocked over an oil lamp. Cow. Now you think that cow got up in the morning and said, I'm going to burn down Chicago? No way. No way. But it happened. See, it doesn't matter if it's unintentional. That's all I want you to see is it doesn't matter if it's unintentional. It still burns. It still causes that fire. Now, I have this as another example just because I want to look at it positive. Now, you look at fire. Fire has great power to just lay waste a forest. But also, when you get in your car and you're driving down the road and you hear your engine going tick, 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 and those pistons going up and down, what's causing that? It's fire. It's explosions. But what's the difference between a forest fire and the fire that's going on in your engine? Control. That's it. Just control. The explosions in your engine are controlled explosions. In other words, they're timed exactly right, exactly the way that the engineers want them to be. Forest fires just let loose. Your tongue boasts great things. It can do great things, but only if you control it. Only if you make it do what you want it to do, and you aren't somebody who just runs at the mouth. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, and then down verse 6, it says, and the tongue is a fire. It is a world of iniquity. the tongue is set among our members, that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. I have a picture of a snake up here because I want you to think about for a second, when it makes the statement, it's set on fire by hell and it defiles the whole body. We're going to talk more about what it means to be set on fire by hell, but just think for a second, how much power do words have? When you go back to the garden, you go back to Genesis and you look in the garden, what caused Adam and Eve to sin? What changed their whole world? It was that serpent. And what did he do? He pull out his fangs and he say, I'll bite you unless you eat from that tree? No. Did he wrap around them and force her hand over there to grab the tree and grab some fruit? No. What did it? He spoke. That serpent spoke, and with words, he set their whole course on fire. When you and I look at life, that's what happens. The words we use can set your whole life on a certain course. And not only your life, but others. Because when you think about raising your children, what do your kids listen to? Your words. And it affects them. They affect them. And so when you talk about the whole body is defiled, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. Well, what changed the whole world? Go back to Genesis. What changed the whole world? Everything about it. Words. Just the words of the serpent and people heeding those words, and then all of a sudden there's sin and kicked out of the garden, and the rest is history. But now the opposite is also true. You look at the world full of sin and all the problems in it, and, well, how do you get out of that world of sin? How do you get hope? How do you get free from sin? Words. When you obey the words of the Bible, it changes things. It gives you your life back. And it tells you about Christ, and it shows you what it takes to be saved. And so words are powerful. That's my whole point. The words that you use are powerful. You can use your words to help bring people into a better world, and you can use your words to bring people into a world full of iniquity. And so we're talking about the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The idea there is it's within the power of your tongue is a whole universe of problems. It's like we make the statement, we say, oh, that guy's in a world of hurt. What do we mean when we say that guy's in a world of hurt? He's not just hurting a little bit, is he? He's just hurting every possible way. Every aspect of his life is hurting. Your tongue, how much sin and iniquity, wickedness can your tongue bring in? Oh, just a whole world of it. Just a whole world of iniquity. If you don't watch the way you speak, you can just cause a whole world of problems for yourself. Just a whole world. As you go through life, you will be known by your words. And your words will decide the course of your life in more ways than you and I can fathom. It says the tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. If I say something mean to you, do you just blame my tongue? You say, oh, well, Scott's a really nice guy, but his tongue was very mean to me. Is that what you do? No, you just lump my whole body in together with it, don't you? You say, well, that's Scott. Whatever Scott says, that you don't associate it with just my tongue. You associate it with all of me. It defiles all of me if I'm not careful with my words. Your reputation is going to be affected by your words. People are going to think of you, and when they think of you, they're going to think about what you say. And so your words are a powerful, powerful thing. Now, why is he putting this all in the negative? Why is he emphasizing the negative so much? Why do we ever do stuff like that when you're talking to somebody and you emphasize the negative over and over and over again? If you do that, this bad thing will happen, and this bad thing will happen, and this bad thing will happen. Why do we emphasize the negative so much? Because you're scared. You're scared for the person. Right? When you take a kid and you take them to driver's ed, when they take a kid and they set them down in driver's ed and they set them there in the seat and the instructor is going to start talking, is the first thing he talk about how wonderful cars are and how it will open your life and give you so much freedom, and you'll now be able to get from here to here in 5 minutes instead of 30 minutes. Is that what they talk about in driver's ed? They get you in there, and the first thing they want to start talking to you about is about all the bad things about cars. They want to tell you about how bad the accidents are. They want to show you the videos of accidents and all the damage that's been caused. They want to talk about all the negative things because they're scared for you. And they want you to be scared. The tongue's the same way. You really should be scared with words. Scripture says that every careless word will be held accountable for. That's a big deal. And so he hammers all of these negative. And so then down verse 6 it says it defiles the whole body, and it sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. If you can imagine your whole life, the nature, the course of your life is like a rocket. Well, what lights the rocket off? It says it's your tongue. The whole direction of your life is going to be controlled by your tongue. If you're nice to people, what do you find people tend to do? When you're a nice person and you say nice things to other people, do people normally just say, oh, I don't want to be around that guy? Or do they tend to flock towards you when you're nice? Oh, you're nice, you get more friends, don't you? We have a saying around our house we like to say a lot, is if you want to have a friend, you must first be a friend. So you say nice things to people, and you'll surround yourself with nice people. Well, what does the Bible say about the company you keep? It says, bad company corrupts good morals. So, if how I talk will affect the kind of people around me, if I'm a mean kind of person, what kind of people are going to be willing to hang around me? Other mean people. If I'm a nice speaking kind of person, what kind of people want to hang around me? Nice people. If I speak crass, I use lots of swear words, what kind of people are going to hang around me? Well, other people talk that same way. If I don't use that kind of language, and I'm careful with my speech, I'm careful to use pure words, what kind of people are more likely to hang around me? The company you keep will affect your morals, which will affect your soul, which will affect your eternity. And what affects the company you keep? Trace it back. How you talk. Whole course of your life is set on fire by your words. You get married, and you start talking to your spouse, and how you talk to your spouse is going to dictate the rest of your marriage, isn't it? You can either have years and years of happiness. There are people you see, they get married, and they just never seem to leave the honeymoon. And I'm sure they have a fight now and then, but it sure doesn't look like that to the rest of us. They're just so nice to each other, and they enjoy each other, and they just have a happy marriage. Then you see other people, and you wonder if they ever had a honeymoon. Because it's just been a war from day one. And it's been a war of what? You know, when you talk about that marriage is just like a war, what are they fighting with? Sticks and clubs? Words. Set on course the whole nature of your life, whole direction of your life with the words you use. Your relationship with your children, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with other Christians, your relationship with people outside in the world. In every aspect, your words affect your relationships. And that's your whole life. Your whole life is the people who are in it. And so it says your whole life is set on fire by the tongue. And he says, what tends to light that fuse? Where does the tongue so often get its spark from? That's a scary word that's used down there in verse 6. It's set on fire by what? Hell. Now, what he's doing here is he's emphasizing a point. He's emphasizing that the kind of words that we use, when we are not careful with our words, when we say mean things or callous things or selfish things, when we are not careful with our words, where do we learn that from? Where's the source of all that? Now, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Christ ran into a bunch of people, and he says, you are a bunch of liars, and I know why you're liars. You got that from who? So you got that from your father, who is the father of lies. Who's the father of lies? Satan. You got that from Satan. Now, when you and I are not careful with our words, you trace it back to the father of bad language, the father of unkind things, the father of deceptive things, the father of evil speech, Satan. And so, this is another way to put it. It says your tongue sets on fire your whole life, and if you're not careful with your words, where did it get its power from? It came from hell. It came from wickedness embodied, is the idea. And so he's really, once again, just emphasizing, when we're not careful with our words, it says a whole lot, doesn't it? Words are so powerful that if you don't watch them, it'll destroy your life, and it will make you a child of Satan if you just don't watch your words. And so, now, are words capable of doing good things? The answer is yes. Your words can do wonderful things. Why is he emphasizing negative right now? He wants you to be scared. That's the whole point. To scare us into thinking before we speak, because every single one of us has a lever between our brain and our mouth. But the problem is most of us haven't greased that lever in a while, so it gets stuck. We got to get better. We got to get better at knowing when to open our mouth, what words to use, being careful with them, because so much damage can be done. Whole congregations have been destroyed just because people didn't watch their words. Just weren't careful with how they spoke. Now, down verse 7. Anybody have it? Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, I actually kind of like the wheel of nature one a little bit better. My version says the course of nature. The idea is, you think of a wheel, and when you push a wheel, you put some oomph into it, and then the wheel keeps going. That's the idea there. It's the momentum, it's the direction, that sort of a thing. I like wheel, not necessarily because it's a better translation, but it's a little more picturesque. So yeah, but that's the idea behind it. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, down verse 7. He says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly or restless evil, full of deadly poison." Now here, I have up here a picture of an emerald tree boa, because this is the snake I always think of when I think about the tongue being like a snake. Because he says, he says, now every beast and bird and reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. That is, we can go out and any animal you can think of, we can train it. And you say, well, no, wait a second, what about cats, Scott? Well, actually, you got to work really hard, but you can train a cat. How about a snake? Well, what do they call them? Snake charmers, right? You can train a snake. How about the biggest thing you can think of? How about an elephant? Well, yeah, they train elephants. See, any animal we have decided we want to domesticate, we can do it. Sometimes it takes a while. In fact, when you start talking about things like cattle and whatnot, there was a lot of breeding involved to domesticate cattle. They start out and they say, okay, well, these ones are a little bit more gentle than these ones, so we'll breed the gentle ones and not the wild ones. And it took generations to get to where they could domesticate certain types of cattle or certain horses and things like that, or dogs. You know, you talk about a dog, well, where do dogs kind of originate from? You trace it back, it's to a wolf kind, isn't it? Well, wolves aren't very domesticated. Well, how'd you get dogs? They just kept breeding them and breeding them and breeding them until they got, little happy little chihuahuas that are real nice. And so you can domesticate anything. When man puts his mind to domesticating animals, to taming them, we can do it. But not the tongue. The tongue is like an undomesticated and untamed snake. Now, the reason I say that is, he says it's a restless evil and it's full of deadly poison. Whenever I think of an animal full of deadly poison, I think of a snake. Now, there are other animals full of deadly poison, but I always think of a snake. And that's a pretty good analogy, because one of the things that the Scriptures talk about when talking about people who aren't careful with their tongue and people who speak evil things, the Scriptures say, it's over in, I think, Romans chapter 2, it says, it's like they have their adders with poison under their tongues. So you can domesticate any animal, but when it comes to the tongue, we can't domesticate it. Now here's the thing. The reason I have a picture of an emerald tree boa up there is when I worked at the zoo, there was one particular snake that was worse than all the others, and it was this emerald tree boa. Now the other snakes, there were meaner snakes we had. We had some rattlesnakes that were really mean. To this day, I don't like rattlesnakes. They still give me the willies. Because they were always mean. I mean, you open the cage on the rattlesnake, you open the top, and he'd just immediately strike at you. You just count on it every single time. But the emerald tree boa was the one you had to watch out for. Because at least the rattlesnakes were consistent. they were always the same. This emerald tree boa was not that way. He hated you all the time. All the time. But he wouldn't strike every time. In fact, I think, as much as you can imagine a snake thinking, I don't know how much he thought, but he had a knack for you just about get to the point where you were comfortable around him. You know, you'd open the cage and you'd bring the mouse in and you'd set the mouse in, and he's up there, and you think, well, he's kind of far away up there in the cage. He can't get to me from there. So you bring in the mouse and you set it, and then you look up and, well, he maybe moved like 3 inches closer. You think, but he's moving so slow, and I'll be out of here in just a second. And then you start maybe cleaning away. And then he'd get so he was so docile, you'd think he wasn't even paying attention. He wouldn't even look at you, looking over this way. And then as soon as you let your guard down, guess what that snake did? That's the one snake in the whole zoo that I've seen this close. Because he got that close. That'll wake you up. And he was restless. He was unruly. You couldn't tame him. The idea here of your tongue as a restless evil full of deadly poison is it'll get you when you least expect it. Don't think you can ever tame it. Tamed animals you can take, and you don't even have to put them on a chain. You don't have to lock them up or anything like that. You get a dog and it's tamed, and you can just walk right along the street and he'll stay right there with you. It won't do anything. It'll obey 100% of the time. You don't worry about it with children. You don't worry about anything like that. But an untamed animal, you've got to be cautious around. And that's what your tongue is. You've got to always be vigilant. That's his point. Don't ever think you've got it beat. Now, you can get your tongue to do what you want it to. In fact, would it even be worth talking about the tongue if you couldn't control it? Just be kind of depressing, wouldn't it? Here's all these horrible things your tongue can do, and oh, by the way, you can't do anything about it. No, you have control, but you've got to control it all the time. Don't ever think you can just say, oh, well, I've achieved, and it's domesticated. It's not. It's an unruly evil. And so it's restless. Just when you think you've got your tongue to where it's going to obey you, that's when it's going to sting. That's when it's going to do something horrible. So you've got to always be cautious. Down in verse 9. Anybody have any questions? Okay. It says, with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Now here, he says, really, when you talk about the tongue, he says, compare it to a fountain of water, a spring of water. When you have a spring of water, it's one type of water, isn't it? It's one type of water that comes out of it all the time. It's either sweet water or it's bitter water. It's one of the two. But with your tongue, what do? Sometimes it's bitter and sometimes it's sweet. And you get the two mixed up. And he says that's not the way it ought to be. There should be consistency. And one of the things he says that we are the most inconsistent is when we talk about God, how do we talk? Oh, wonderful Lord, we love you so. We get up here and, a man will lead prayer and he'll lead an eloquent, beautiful, reverent prayer to God and then go home and swear and cuss and yell. Ought not to be. That's his point. It ought not to be. See, when it comes to God, we say, oh, we'll eulogize God. That's actually when it talks there about we bless our God and Father. That word for bless is the same word that we get the English word eulogize from, where you'll just spout about how great they are. If somebody dies, and how many times have you ever gone to a funeral and somebody do they say mean things about people at funerals? Doesn't matter how mean the person was. They don't talk about that, do they? They just say all the nice stuff. And so he says, when we talk about God, what do we say? Just nice, friendly stuff. Then we go to talk about our brother, and it's just venom. He says it ought not to be that way. Because a water spring you wouldn't accept that gave you good water sometime and bad water sometime. And a fig tree, it doesn't give you two types of fruit. It's either a fig tree or it's a grapevine. And if it's a grapevine, it's going to give you olives. If it's a fig tree, it's going to give you figs, but it's not going to give you both. And he says that's the problem with the tongue, is that we think we can get away with both. He says if you're going to speak highly of God, then how should we speak to our fellow man and of our fellow man who's made in the likeness of God? Right? Created in God's image. That same careful speech. When you go to pray, you think about it, don't you? You're careful with your words. Doesn't matter how mad you are, you watch it. Do the same with your brother. Do the same with your fellow man. And so as we look at it, he's really hammering this idea of the tongue is a super powerful thing, and we don't appreciate it. And we're not careful with it. Okay, any questions on that? Now, down to verse 13, here's the conclusion of the thing. Who is wise and understanding among you? Now, we just got done talking about the tongue. So who are you that think you're wise? Any of you think you can speak well? Any of you think that you have wisdom to share and understanding? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Now, he's not just talking about wisdom in general. He's talking about meek wisdom. There's a certain area of wisdom that's meek. And when you speak, when you interact with your fellow man, we're told to be peaceable, gentle, kind, not returning evil for evil. All these things that we should be very careful, swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. That's the way we're told to speak. So if you think you're a wise person, you say, "Oh well, Scott, you're talking about the tongue and how bad and how many problems the tongue causes." Well, that may apply to everybody else, but not me. I'm wise. Well, how do you show it? You better be meek. Let your conduct, your good conduct, be shown in the meekness of wisdom. Now, that you're the kind of person that has the wisdom to be meek with your words. If you think, "Oh, I've got this whole tongue thing taken care of, now let me just tell you about it," and you're the kind of person you say, "Oh, I know I'm right," and you're real forceful and you're real bold, I tell you one thing, you haven't got the tongue figured out yet. If you're not careful with your speech, if you're somebody who's real quick to speak, quick with the words, quick to say, "I'm right and I know the answer," and you don't listen very much, I tell you what, you don't have the tongue figured out. And so he really hammers the whole thing home. He says, well, no matter what, if you look at all those verses and you say, "Well, that applies to everybody else, but it doesn't apply to me," But I can tell you what, you're the one person it most definitely applies to. Because what are we told about the tongue? You ever going to tame it? Never, ever, ever. The only person who's going to ever have any success with their tongue is the person who says, oh, I'm still working on it. That tongue's an unruly thing, and I got to be cautious with my words. That person can be successful. So if you think you're wise, you think you have understanding, let's see it in the meekness of your wisdom. And so down in verse 15, he's going to pick up into a new topic that'll continue into chapter 4, which is dealing with envy and self-seeking. The attitudes we have towards others, whether it be jealousy or self-seeking, where we put ourselves and our own wants first. What happens when people do that? And so we'll start down in verse 15 next week and head into chapter 4.